everyone. It's Adam Caplan and Andrew DiCecco. Yes, that man right there. Here for Inside the Birds. Moshe will be back with me on early Monday morning before Jeff and I leave for the Senior Bowl. We'll talk about that later. But Andrew, great to have you. It's been a while.
Great to be with you, Adam. A lot to talk about.
I know. It's just you're with us at the perfect time because so much has happened and so much will happen in the future with coaching changes and just assistant changes. They still need to get an offensive coordinator. They have the defensive coordinator. We'll talk about that. They had the press conference you were at. That must have been an adventure. It got delayed a little bit. Who knows why? Hint, hint. We'll talk about that and all that and more on today's show. But, Andrew, it's interesting. Jeff and I, this is our, let's see, 18, 19, 20, 23. This is actually our seventh season going. I can't count. It's our seventh season coming up. This is hard to believe. We're in now the off season, but there's no off season for the Eagles, so we're still going to do 3 shows for the near future. Then we're going to get to our Greg Cosell stuff for the draft and free agency, and also we're hoping if we could get your thing sponsored, man, we would love to get those get your small school diary, your scouting, and all the stuff that you've done in the past for us. So we'd love to do that, and
Absolutely.
We'd love to get to that stuff. Oh, by the way, will you be at the Senior Bowl? I forgot to ask.
Not the Senior Bowl, but I'm working on the combine.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you been in the combine?
No, I have not, believe it or not.
Ooh.
So like this year is like a must. Like it's time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. The combine, your first combine, man, it's wild, man. It's Moshe and I will be there for 5 days. I've actually been there for a week before in Indy, but we know downtown Indy like the back of our hand, and that because of all the things going on with the Eagles roster, which is clearly not as good as we thought, or at least we hope it would be, right? For competitive reasons. They got a lot of work to do. And also for Patreon, hey, this is a first for us, Andrew. Jeff and I are going to be doing shows from the Senior Bowl. We're actually going to do a live show, live stream Q&A, Wednesday night at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, for those of us who are in Mobile. And we'll take all your questions. We expect a big crowd for that. And Jeff and I will be there for the first 2 days of practices on Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursdays, Andrew, that practice is later. That's more of a shirts and T-shirts and shorts. Friday's a walkthrough and Saturday's the game. And, oh, by the way, the weather's going to be good. So we look forward to that.
That's good.
As you know, in Mobile, you never know what you're going to get.
It rains a lot.
It does, exactly. It's the rainy season in Mobile. But we're going to have plenty of stuff that sometimes, as you know, for people who've been on the live streams and also on our Discord channel, we're also in Discord, we're getting back into it. Stuff that is not fit to print, stuff that we don't normally talk about publicly. We talk a little bit about privately, give some nuggets there. It's always fun. Patreon.com/Inside the Birds. If you want to sign up and join us, we look forward to seeing people later this season as well. So, Andrew, as we get started the show this morning, I just 25 years I've covered this team or near it. You never really know when you get the season-ending press conference. I remember when it was Joe Banner and Howie, Andy and Joe and Howie and Andy. Things have changed. Now it was Nick and Howie. Let's get started with you, my friend. You were there, okay? It got delayed a little bit. Nobody could figure out why. The conspiracy theories. Who knows? Maybe they were talking to Vic Fangio's agent. Who knows? That was fascinating that the Dolphins announced, that Vic's available, that they had a mutual parting of the ways, which was bizarre in and of itself. Basically, he was only there 1 year. We have some pretty interesting information on that, which we'll get to. But Andrew, you were there, my friend. Give us a bird's eye view of when it started, what were you expecting? Then we'll get into what you got.
Well, once the news trickled in midway through the press conference, Adam, about Vic Fangio being available and the Eagles being a front runner for him, you couldn't help but tie two and two together and wonder if that was why the press conference was delayed 30 minutes. But as it were, you started to see them make their slow trek down that walkway, and by the time they got to the podium, it looked like they had been admonished by Jeffrey Lurie. You didn't see the joking around. You know how sometimes in those press conferences you see the nudge and they joke, the banter between the two to kind of ease the tension. You didn't see anything like that. It was a very somber mood from both of them. And right off the bat, Nick Sirianni goes and he fields a question about Brian Johnson, who of course has been let go, and he mentions the need to bring in fresh ideas. Now, I had a problem with that answer because, yeah, they do need fresh ideas, of course, but this offense was in Sirianni's vision. His fingerprints were all over it. And it was December 20th, I believe he said, "This is my offense. I feel like Brian has been unfairly maligned because he's the play caller, but make no mistake, this is my offense." So to see Brian Johnson let go and say, unfortunately, he's the one that has to go. Well, I mean, it is something had to change, but obviously it's with Brian. But now he was very adamant about giving full ownership, full autonomy to whoever coaches the offensive side of the ball and whoever coaches the defensive side of the ball, where he's going to be more of the CEO head coach and oversee everything and sort of operate in that way. So right off the bat, addressing the Brian Johnson thing caught me. Nick, I thought, really caught my attention. I think that he seemed like a somber and almost like a humbling type of demeanor from him. Whereas Howie, like, I can think of a question right off the bat where he was asked about the defensive line and then them not living up to expectations relative to, all the money allocated to the position. And he immediately goes right to linebacker and gets sort of defensive and bristles at that notion and says there's a misconception and doesn't seem like they're going to change their philosophical approach to that position. So that caught my attention right away. And then, I mean, what was it for you? What was your main takeaway? What stood out to you?
So definitely the first thing I noticed, because watching it on YouTube, is that they looked tired. It was basically, you were talking about being somber. Maybe the combination of both. And Howie did a good job explaining why they took a little time here. Because remember, they got home early Tuesday morning. You have to get through the year end. The coaches have to turn in their year end. Of course, some of those guys could be gone, but it's the unfortunate part of the business. They have to turn in the year end reports. By the end of the week, I mean, you got to get to the end of the week. That's going to take, certainly by Thursday or Friday. Then they had a snowstorm. You're not going to work over the weekend after you're out of the playoffs. Coaches don't do that until you get into draft season. Then sometimes you have to work weekends. So I can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was just like, man, there's a lot of excuses here. I mean,
Yeah.
I believe the Buffalo Bills had their press conference right the day after they lost that game. So I don't know if the Eagles had the longest exit interview process in the NFL.
Yeah.
They said it took 2 or 3 days to get through it.
Yeah.
But I mean, to have a press conference 9 days later is sort of unprecedented.
Okay, so on that, see, I think the other thing, and I don't, you correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't talk about the meeting with Jeffrey, right? I don't remember that.
No.
See, that's part of this. Why it got delayed, because they had to have that the previous Friday. They had to get through that and what their plan was going to go forward. And they had to take care of some coaching situations. Some guys had to be let go, as we know. Both coordinators and some of the assistants are going to be let go, and that's going to take some time. And we have to see what Vic Fangio wants to do. We'll get to him in a couple minutes here. It was, going in, so I've seen these before, and sometimes you kind of know what you're going to get, sometimes you don't. I was just kind of interested because we knew Nick was coming back, but how would that go? And he had already been a CEO head coach. That was his decision 2 years ago, because he gave up play calling after 7 weeks, 7 games. They were 2-5. He wasn't comfortable calling plays. It was a really smart thing. You fast forward now, though, the one thing he did say, as we fast forwarded it, he did say that I forget what the term was. You might remember. He said, "Oh, we're going to bring in a new scheme, and that guy's going to call the plays." But he did say he'll be involved. I forget what the term or the verbiage or words that he used.
I remember like my antennas went up when he said I think we need to look outside for fresh ideas outside the family tree that we have here. So he seems to, obviously, either he seems or he was sort of coerced into saying, you got to scrap your idea and we're going to have to get some outside help in here to reinvigorate the offense that was really stale. He mentioned stale multiple times.
Yeah, and again, when you say that, we don't know, is that what was said in this meeting with Jeffrey and Howie? Who knows? But it is interesting because he was defiant in season about, and you brought this up, you're absolutely right, about it's his scheme. He brought it in, and by the way, it's a combination of a couple schemes. Sure, it worked at 22 like magic, though he wasn't calling the plays, but he was involved in it, of course, because it's his scheme. He had to be to help the guys learn it. And then it didn't work, and we don't know exactly what was said in the meeting last Friday, but clearly they were not coming back with a scheme because it didn't work. So they're going to look outside, and we'll get, as the show develops here, we'll get over some of those coordinators and what we know from the interviews and what we know about the schemes that they potentially bring in. But it's going to look different. And you know what, Andrew? It needs to look different because it was tough watching their offense last season. I mean, every week we're like, no windbreakers. Where's imagination? I mean, when you watch their offense, Andrew, what did you see last?
Just a plodding offense without rhythm, without any sort of flow, no imagination, no innovation. There was a lack of motion, which we've talked about at length throughout the season. I thought that the receivers, the route concepts weren't where they needed to be, and they didn't utilize the middle of the field much at all. I just thought it was very unimaginative, and you wondered where that was coming from. Because a lot of times, Adam, I don't know how you feel about this, but when I was watching the offense this year, it reminded me a lot of that 2021 offense before Nick Sirianni seeded play calling and gave it to Shane Steichen. I mean, that to me, I've talked to different people that are close to Brian Johnson, and they were in agreement with me that they didn't believe that was his offense. It was hard to imagine. Look at the Florida offense, the way that operated. You can even go back to Houston when he was there. Mississippi State when he was working with the quarterback. I mean, it just didn't have that same feel. So it looked a lot like Sirianni had his fingerprints and was very heavy-handed in that regard.
All right, so on that, I did talk to a current NFL assistant coach on offense who said that the way it would work is once you see it not working, you have an immense playbook that you ran in OTAs and training camp. Once teams start figuring it out, you go to the other plays. You don't just keep running the same plays over and over and think it's going to work. Like Nick's talk about doubling down on what you know. Well, they didn't know because it didn't work. And you've got to be better than that. That's on him. Like that, and I'm not protecting Brian Johnson. I don't know the guy. But it's his scheme. Find other plays. Like on defense, Patricia just completely butchered it. He decided he was going to bogart everything and bring a lot of his concepts in, which because you were in the locker room. Players had no idea what they were doing. Whereas here, offensively, you have a big playbook here. But go through it. Find stuff that works. You just talked about it. Middle of the field not being used. How's that even possible with the talent level that the receiver and tight end? Don't give me protection because protection was fine. It wasn't great, but it was good enough.
Yes.
So that's on Nick. And look, good. And we'll get into in a couple minutes here some of the coordinators, what they could bring in. But I wish I wish Nick could have he wouldn't do it. Now Andy after a series of years would do it because you could bring stuff up and he would say, well, we could do better with this, that, and the other. Nick, this maybe would not been the venue to do it, but whoever they hire as offensive coordinator, I'll be interested to see what that guy's scheme is comparatively to Nick's scheme. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. And I have to think that it's going to be a stark contrast to what we saw last season, just given the results. So he's going to be able to have full autonomy. That's really what they relayed in that press conference.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. We know privately that Nick knows he's got to do that. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. So as that press conference went on, it was one of these situations where I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, this is not your typical season ender. Yes, their season ended prematurely. But do you think, being there as you were, do you think they both understood the season, maybe the roster wasn't as good as maybe they thought it was, or maybe still think it was?
Well,
go ahead. What are your thoughts? Because with me, I was like, where are we going here? I don't agree with some stuff.
Yeah, and so that I'm glad you mentioned that, Adam. And one of my main takeaways from that was from Howie Roseman. It seemed to think they kept mentioning we were 10-1, and they mentioned their accolades. So to me, it seemed like he thought that 10-1 was their true to form, and the 1-6 skid was an aberration. That's sort of that's sort of what I gleaned based on how he answered some of those questions, which is troubling if you think about it, because the status quo is not the way to go. They had it was a free fall. They have to revamp defense and the offense. It's going to be a lot of work this offseason.
Yeah, no doubt. In fact, if you really look at it, right, they were 10-1, no doubt. They had the best record in the NFL after 11 games, but you saw how they barely beat Buffalo. Okay, that was I give the offense credit. Defense struggled. It was actually raining in that game. the Kansas City game, back-to-back, Kansas City Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken. They were down by 10 at halftime in both games. They came back to win. Dak Prescott somehow goes out of bounds when he couldn't. Then the craziness of defending the goal line. I hate to say luck, but the thing is they were living dangerously. So for Howie to say, "Oh, we were legit 10-1," no, they weren't. I mean, the record said 10-1, but they weren't that good. We all know that if we're being honest here.
Yeah, we all watched the games, and winning by the skin of your teeth against the Washington Commanders, having to go to overtime against a team like that. I thought their most complete game was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in week 3. But outside of that, their backs were against the wall every week, and they had to find different ways to win. Which with a roster like that high octane offense, that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, and remember the Miami game was maybe Desai's signature moment. After that, it was downhill. But who the heck knows what was involved in that one? Whether he was doing everything in that game. But that was, I think, week 7. That was a great Sunday night game. But the bottom line is here, they've got a lot of work to do. I'm interested to see, because Nick's going to be, as we understand it, Nick definitely will be involved in the offense. It's not like that he's going to be put into like a corner. He's the head coach, and but they're going to bring in a new scheme. Now, here's the other thing, Andrew, and we'll have to wait to see what it looks, whoever they hire. What does Nick even know the scheme? Like, does he have any experience in it? Because what I understand, he's a smart guy. He can handle giving his ideas on concepts, but if he's not familiar with the scheme, that's also something.
Yeah, he's going to have to learn it, because being the head coach, you have to have a general overview of all the responsibilities and what it all entails. So he may have to learn a new scheme.
Yeah, that is true, and we'll see what happens there. And next up, we're going to talk about the Fangio scheme. Right after the break here, we're gonna listen to our friends from Ocean Casino Resort.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
All right, everyone, welcome back Inside the Birds. Adam Caplan, Andrew DiCecco here. And Andrew, okay, so they got their man, okay? A year later, the bizarreness of the Vic Fangio situation. What's comical is that, yes, Vic was not a consultant until late in the playoffs, but from what we understand, in the 22 season, he would show up occasionally. Jeff and I saw him in Miami for the joint practices. We saw him somewhere else. We saw him at NovaCare. I don't know, Vic became very friendly with Howie and Nick. Nick loves that scheme, that Fangio scheme, because it's so hard to beat, Andrew. Because when it's, and of course it's Vic, but when it's at its best, it makes you bleed 8, 9, 10 play drives, and you get the quarterback frustrated and could turn it over if your rush gets home. But we know when it doesn't work is when there's a lack of discipline, particularly on the back end when you don't have good enough players. But Vic is back, and I know, Andrew, you had a really cool tweet that you put out earlier this week.
Yeah, well, about Vic Fangio himself,
Yep.
it was, yeah. So you're going to get an authoritative coach who's going to command a room. He's going to be the grown up in that room. So to kind of, as an aside to that, when you look at Sean Desai, one of the things that maybe came up when discussing Sean Desai was maybe he lacked confidence. Now, I mean, there's younger players who may view it in a certain way, because he would always say, "What do you think about this third down call this week?" Or what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So if you're a young player coming from the college level where you really had no say, you probably think that's refreshing. If you're an older player, you're probably thinking, you're supposed to tell us what's going on. And, what do you need our input for? So that could be perceived as a lack of confidence. But Vic Fangio, I mean, he's signed, seal, and deliver, man. I mean, this is the real deal. They've tried it with different disciples. You're getting the actual architect of this defense. He can command a room. He's a strict disciplinarian, as I understand it. He would hold 10-minute communication walkthroughs before practice. He's very detailed in the film approach, and sometimes you'd have to watch it 3, 4, 5 times, the same clip, to make sure that you understood it the same way that he did. And he's very adamant about that. So for young players, I think that you're going to get a crash course in film study with Vic Fangio. He holds players to a very high standard, and there's not going to be any room for error. He will hold people accountable, as I understand it. So that's something that I think that you really need from a defense that, to me, or to everyone, lacked discipline clearly throughout the season.
Yeah, and in fact, I think there was a lack of buy-in as much as it may have looked good early in the season with Sean Desai. There seemed not to be enough buy-in from players, and that ain't going to happen with Vic because it's his scheme. He is the man. He is the Fangio scheme, as James Harden would say. I am the system. So, couple things here. So Mosher gave me some really interesting notes. So he said an NFL GM told him that thinking around the league was that Fangio wanted to be closer to family. Remember, he's from the Scranton area, so he's only an hour and a half away. Want to be back, and it wasn't that the Dolphins were upset with him, but to get out of to ask out of your contract, or both sides agree after a season that he's out, it's kind of weird. I thought that was kind of odd. Look, we know the Eagles love him. Okay, we know Howie and Nick really got to be very friendly with him. In fact, what I found interesting, he took this guy, took one of the assistants with him. Thinking the kid's name, he wound up being the safeties coach, Joe.
Joe Wood. Joe, no, not.
He's a safeties coach. I can't.
I know Ronaldo Hill was his defensive backs coach.
Right.
I believe in Denver.
But I think when you look at it, Andrew, with Vic's the kind of guy who's going to get whatever he wants, whatever Howie and Vic talk about. Vic gets what he wants, and that's just the way it is. And there are going to be changes on the staff. There's just on the staff. There have to be, because they have to know what they have to know what he wants. His name is Joe Casper. That's
Joe Casper, formerly with the Eagles.
Yes. So he took, because again, he was, as we understand it, he was around the team quite a bit in 22. He'd show up every couple weeks because he was taking some time off, after he left Denver, after he got fired. In fact, before they hired Gannon, we had heard Vic was actually on their list of potential coordinators, but Vic was not ready to coach. He had plenty of time left on his contract, and for the first time, like in his career, he actually could actually see his family and so forth. But so he brought this guy Joe Casper with him, who's a young and up-and-coming coach with the Eagles, and Casper is a safeties coach who, as we understand it, could have went to Arizona with Gannon. Gannon wanted him, so we'll see. I mean, he's under contract, so we'll see if Vic tries to get him out of there. But he's going to have to bring some guys in that he knows.
Now now the linebacker position is really interesting, Adam, because I think I would imagine Vic would oversee the linebackers much like he did when he was with the Houston Texans, when he was the defensive coordinator and the linebackers coach. He has a rich history there. He coached the linebackers with the Ravens some years ago. So I think that you're going to see improved linebacker play. Now the question becomes, are they going to be able to bring in the necessary personnel for him to execute his vision?
I'll tell you what Howie's really good at, amongst other things. He tries to give the coaches what they want, but fit their scheme. I mean, he gave Gannon, my goodness gracious, 2 years ago. I mean, you can't, what else could you possibly do for the guy? I'm not taking anything from Gannon. Did it, no matter how many people hate Gannon, did a great job. I mean,
he did.
The numbers show it. People want to say, oh, he was distracted. You could come up with every excuse why they wouldn't. So blame him. It's like people blaming Hurts, who had over 400 yards because of the fumble, like the loss on him. And people, they want accountability, so they're going to point. All right, I get that. But bottom line is, Howie does a good job of getting coaches what they need. Obviously needs to do a better job. The roster clearly was not good enough on defense. But this is from a coaching source who we talked to, who worked with Vic in Denver. He coaches his coaches hard. This is the first. I didn't know that. It's interesting. It's not just his players that he's a disciplinarian, as you were saying, which is absolutely true. He gets on his coaches. So that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. Coaching hard is really needed, I think, there, quite frankly. Andrew?
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially with the younger players there.
Yeah. And on that, look, they've got I'm so glad you brought that up, because, and we'll get more into this in future shows about what the contract, we do a contract show and who might have to go, and everybody knows about James Bradbury and his contract, the fully guaranteed money, the dead money if they cut him. Whether he'd be a fit. Well, he was a fit for Fangio because they were running it. Now Vic is actually here. but he actually, he didn't play well. Bradbury could have been benched if they could have found someone who could replace him. So that's something I have to get through here. But the coaching source we talked to said that Vic coaches a certain style. His coaches have to understand what they're being asked to do. And the coaches also have to hold the players responsible if we're going to work for them. So you and I are kind of seeing the same way from the people we've spoken with. It's going to be interesting because we know that Nick's a screamer and a yeller, but he's a big connect with the players thing. That's why the players generally like him. But with Vic, I don't think it's always warm and fuzzy. So I'm interested to see. I've seen him coach before when he's a D coordinator, but I don't remember exactly how he did it because I was not told this, so I didn't really know. Because when I'm told about a coach to watch, I'll watch them. So I'm interested to see what happens here. But so let me ask you this: you're around these young kids, a lot of the young players. Well, I know we're going to talk a little bit later about your rookie diary, but in your opinion, based on being around the players as you were, do you think they had a good buy-in from Nick? I mean, do you think they bought in, and where do you think their trust level was with coaches?
Yeah, I think they bought in. I think that the defensive coordinators change didn't do them any favors when they were learning one scheme. They were swimming a lot of the season. A lot of the veterans were, by the way, as well on the back end. So there were communication errors all around. But I never once got the sense, Adam, that there was a lack of buy-in from the young players. That you look at someone like Eli Ricks, and he was eager to take on the challenge of learning a new position at nickel and learn and taking on extra hours with Ronell Wilson, I believe, is the Nichols coach, and he would put in extra time throughout the week to master a new position. Keely Ringo was someone who didn't factor in at all, but worked hard in practice to become someone they can count on the field on game day. So these things right there kind of indicate that you're getting buy-in from younger players because they continue to work and find a way to factor prominently into the defense.
Yeah, Ronell Williams is their Nichols coach, right? Yeah, that's right.
Ronell Williams was their Nichols coach, exactly.
Let me ask you this: did they give you an idea why they thought Ricks could do it? Why they thought he could play inside?
You know what? And I asked Eli about his transition and why he felt that he was able to kind of hit the ground running so early versus some of the other guys, because he leapfrogged Josh Jobe, who was the top outside corner coming out of training camp. The mental aspect was something that he grasped right away, and he was able to, show on the side, put him out there, and he kept delivering. And I think that he kept earning trust of the coaches, and they liked his body type, they liked his intelligence, but really from the mental aspect, he grasped things a lot faster. And I think that he made the most of his opportunities, and they thought that he was best equipped to do it.
Okay, so a couple more notes here before we move on to something else here. Is that, they interviewed Ron Rivera, who did, by the way, they ran the match carry deliver coverages like Vic uses. So they interviewed him, and obviously Howie knows him, and people's front office knows him. And then they interviewed Mike Caldwell, who's from the Todd Bowles tree. Now, what the Eagles like about Mike Caldwell, other than they knew him, is that he runs a 34, and at times the Jaguars defense is pretty good over the last season. It wound up falling apart, but he is a guy that would bring it a little bit. And what we had heard is they wanted someone to take advantage of the talent level that they have. And yes, we all know that there's major holes in the defense in terms of talent. They need more. But the funny thing is, Vic they don't blitz very much. They're going to be in the bottom 10 of blitzing. It's five-man rush, coverage, post snap, make you bleed, make you try to turn it over. So that's the thing is, and depending on how he does to get him talent, I'm interested to see how that happens here. Now, we had heard there were a couple other defensive coordinator candidates on their list. Had they not gotten Vic? A guy that I know they've looked into is Daniel Bullocks of the Niners as the DB's coach. And obviously it doesn't matter now. They couldn't get to him anyway because of coaching. They had a couple other names there that they were looking at some other guys, but
was he a former safety for the Lions, I believe?
Yes, and his brother.
Like a higher draft pick, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he's one of the better young DBs coaches in the league. And see, the thing is, and we'll get to offensive coordinator in a couple of minutes. You want to get guys, the way it works in coordinators. You're always looking for guys from successful programs. And Bullocks played in the league, and so did his brother. And if you look at the Niners, man, I mean, Chris Kusarek, the D-line coach, is phenomenal. They run a wide nine. They don't blitz very much, but they get great pressure because they've got a great front. You wanna get information from these teams. Al Davis used to do that. The late great Al Davis would like to bring in guys from really good teams and talk to them. Sometimes he didn't want to. He was actually probably not going to hire them. He just want to know what they thought of the roster and what their thoughts were. So you never really know. But it's going to be fascinating to see because he is the guy. This is his scheme, Andrew. And it's just kind of funny because he was around the team so much at 22, and I know a lot of the coaches got to know him, and Howie and Nick became really close to him, and now they have him. Look, it's no guarantee that it's going to work. And if you don't have the players, man, you know that. You just saw this team. If you don't have the players, I don't care what scheme or what coach you have, it's not going to work.
Yeah, just gauging the pulse on social media. I don't know how good of a barometer that is, Adam, but I saw like a mixed review to the hire. Some were like, yeah, they're optimistic about it. And then others were sort of pessimistic and wondering, well, the league has caught up to it by and large over the past few years. I would agree with that, but I would also say having the architect, having the executive chef, so to speak, versus having sous chefs or replicas, if you will, I think is entirely different. So you have to. He's going to need a whole new, a lot of different players, and they're going to have to reevaluate the linebacker position in order for him to execute it properly. But I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt to kind of get it right.
All right. So before we move on, let me give you an idea of my Dolphins guy told me about. He likes Vic. He didn't want to make any excuses for Vic, but he goes, look, think about what we were dealing with injury-wise, and he gave me everything. Bradley Chubb tore his ACL in the game where they got blown out against Baltimore. Xavier Howard missed time with a foot injury, which he just couldn't get over. Javon Holland, both of his knees were bad. He toughed it out when he came back. Brandon Jones, one of their starting safeties, was not ready. He was ready to play, but he was a backup coming back from an ACL. Jalen Ramsey missed half the season due to the comeback from torn meniscus. Jerome Baker missed significant time, was on injured reserve. Jalen Phillips tore his Achilles at the Jets. They ran out of players. They had 6 starters missing late in the season, and that's why Melvin Ingram got signed up to scrap heap. Bruce Irvin, who was starting? Jeff and I were laughing. I mean, no offense to Duke Riley, but he shouldn't be starting, but he had to start because they ran out of inside linebackers.
Wow,
Duke
yeah.
Riley, folks. Justin Houston, that was the other one. They just ran out of players. Look, what can you do if you don't have players? But we'll see. I'm interested. I have not really watched Fangio coach. Like, I'm not a guy that I've studied like on the field at training camp. Because I remember the late great Jim Johnson. I don't know, Andrew, if you're old enough to remember Jim Johnson.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely.
So I love his press conferences, but I love watching him work. It just was so fun to watch. He was a tactician, and he had zone blitz and all that from a 43 front. I mean, he blitzed the heck out of him. Not seeing B-Doc obviously was incredible in that scheme. So I'm gonna go again. If Howie doesn't give him players, it ain't gonna work. So Howie's got a job in his hands. The defensive roster, Andrew. Let's before we move on to offensive coordinator, right? Let me ask you this question. Right now, as we speak, we know that they were down 5 starters plus Maddox for a significant amount of time. What blue chip players do you believe watching this team all last season do they have right now?
Wow. Well, Jalen Carter, of course.
Okay. He faded, but yes. Sure.
Hassan Reddick.
Yep.
I would say Reddick. Sweat was somebody who I went into the season depicting as my defensive MVP, but he looked like he wore down early. He played a ton of snaps this year, so I wouldn't say him. Other than that, Slay, he's sort of fading a little bit too, but I thought that he played at a pretty good level this year. Other than that, Adam, you'd be hard pressed to find any other blue chip players on that defense.
All right, so let me get to Howie Roseman talked to Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean has barely played for 2 seasons. Okay, he just had to. Oh, let me get to that. For InsideTheBirds.com, you talked to him?
Yes, yeah, he gets the boot off, and I guess he gets the boot off in about it'll be 2 weeks now. I spoke to him at locker cleanout. He's confident in himself despite it, and he reiterated it. He wanted it to be known that he never missed a practice or a game at Georgia. He never missed practice or a game as a rookie with the Eagles, and he made it known that he sort of indicated that it was a sort of an aberration, that he doesn't really have an extensive injury history. Now, he has been banged up, but he's played through it in college. That's right. The thing. And you have to wonder if he has the necessary size to be able to withstand the rigors of a full slate of games. I don't know that he does, but I think there's certainly a spot for him. But I think he probably best fits as a number 3 linebacker.
So he confirmed he had a Liz Frank injury, correct?
Yes, and he had the boot on his left foot, and he said the boot comes off. He said 3 weeks on cleanout day, so 2 weeks now, and he's gonna be staying in Philadelphia to do the rehab process. He planned on going south, but he'll be spending the winter and spring up north, and going through the whole rehab process to make sure that he's ready for a critical year 3.
All right, so he'll obviously be ready. So if he starts running by March, yeah, sure, he certainly should be ready for OTAs to participate. So here's the thing, and I agree with you. We just don't know about him yet, right? Nick Morrow's contract's up. Zach Cunningham's contract's up. And I agree with Howie. Cunningham actually, when he was healthy, he was a surprise. You just had no idea because of his injury history, and he'd been cut twice, so you just didn't know, but he did a good job. But honestly, under contract, Sweaty's very good. He was good, but we don't know what he is anymore. He faded.
Yeah.
He was dragging the knee. He had a brace on his left knee. One of the teams told us he didn't look right. Slay's 33. Okay, you don't know about him. Byard, who knows? He's still under contract. He couldn't come back with that contract. They'd have to redo it. Bradbury's too old. We'll talk more about him in future shows, but he's faded. He should have been benched. He was awful. Faded. You don't know about him. So, I mean, Jordan Davis flashed early in the season. Then he really struggled. Carter, we had one of the teams that we talked to tell us that he's a flash player who decides he wants to play hard when he wants to play hard. Like that, like the tape would show them that when they graded him for when they played the Eagles, like they thought his tape was inconsistent. Unbelievably dominant and a really hard player to defend when he was playing great, but sometimes he just didn't bring it. So,
well, I got 2 players for you, Adam, that I wanted to hear what you thought of.
Right.
Avonte Maddox, who I thought struggled when he came back, and Reed Blankenship, who I thought he faded as the season went on. Looked like he lost some weight compared to the start of the season. You could look at that Saquon Barkley play where he got carried for 3 yards, which wouldn't be the case earlier in the season. So I thought that he maybe showed signs of a player that might be better suited to be a key reserve.
Right. So a couple things there. Yeah, there were, let's put it this way. There were teams that told us that they thought Blankenship's story was great. He's a good 3 or 4 safety. Like he shouldn't be a starter. Now we could debate that one, right? C.D. Brown tore his ACL. Your typical rehab will put him up, hugging up to the start of the season. And even if he's ready, you can't expect him to be anywhere close to as good, Andrew, before the injury. So who the heck knows how good he's going to be? Now, the guys who are now, this is going to be Milton Williams' final of his rookie deal. He's been a great story. Okay, we don't talk about him enough, but he's not a starter. But so my point was that he's starting 11. Reddick's a stud. I totally agree with you. Carter, he's got to be better. Got to be more consistent. But he's a stud talent. Sweaty, we just don't know. In the secondary, Andrew, what player do you believe right now? Be honest about it. I know you got to know Eli Ricks, you're Ryan Ringo, and the other kids. But what player do you go, that's a great player? Or that's a very good player?
I can't say that there's any. I can't. It's too early to say that on Ringo. I think Ringo has a really high ceiling, but there aren't any blue chip players in that secondary.
And then Nolan Smith barely played, had a couple flashes. He's a smaller player. We get it why he dropped, but there's talent there. We got to see what kind of offseason he's got to bulk up a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I'm bringing it up because Vic's the D coordinator. They got to help him. They got to get him more talent here. I'm interested to see what Howie does here because no coordinator could you're not winning with this roster and defense. It's just not good enough.
I think you and I and Jeff, maybe even before the season, talked about the lack of depth, to keep an eye on the lack of depth on the defensive line.
Yeah.
And receiver we mentioned, but speaking on defense right now, and that really showed later in the season. Obviously, they lost Derek Barnett. They let him go. But even before that, they didn't have enough depth there to really make they weren't able to send waves like they had in the past.
You know what's interesting about Derek Barnett? So people are like, and I saw it on social media, what the heck? Why didn't he get a chance here? Well, he didn't play into any kind of role. But Barnett played the wide 9 in Houston, and when they let him play, he kicked ass. And that's as you know, Andrew, when you play that wide 9, that's a defensive end dream.
Jason Babin.
Right, exactly, 100% in 2010 and 2011. You're absolutely right. So Hey, look, he didn't do anything here, and he did well there, and good for him. But boy, Vic has got a lot of work to do here, and I'm very interested to see who he adds. And we'll talk more about that. But again, you got to give him some players, and Howie's got a job to do, no question about it. All right. So before we move on here, let's get a little break in here and get a word from our friends at HelloFresh.
Whether your resolution is to save money, eat better, or stress less, HelloFresh is here to help you do all three. Say hello to your most delicious year yet with fresh ingredients and chef-crafted recipes at a price you'll like, delivered right to your door. So you've resolved to actually sit down and eat dinner around the table. We try to do that too. But do you know about those nights when your schedule is just so packed? That's when you turn to HelloFresh's lineup of quick and easy meals. That includes their 15-minute recipes, which are designed to help minimize the meal time stress. That's my kind of meal right there. Every time I make a HelloFresh meal, whether it's the quick and easy one or one of their normal types, my family and I are blown away by the freshness, the taste, and the overall quality. We've tried so many great options, whether it's chicken, steak, vegetarian options, even great. There's just so much variety for you to choose from. So go to HelloFresh.com/Eagles free and use the code Eagles free. That's all one word to get a free breakfast for life. How's that possible? Well, you get one breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. So that's a free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/Eagles free, all one word, EAGLESFREE, and use that code Eagles free. Act now for America's #1 meal kit.
All right, Andrew. So the offensive coordinator interview. So we know now, and we outlined this on Monday, they want to take a look at the West Coast offensive guys. They talked to Kellen Moore. They talked to Cliff Kingsbury. We'll get into those guys in a minute. All right, so let's get into the offense, okay? As we look at some of the coordinator candidates and what it could look like. With this offense last season, and we all know that it underachieved. So now we've closed the season. You've had a chance to digest everything you saw, and we talked earlier in this show about what some of the stuff that happened and what Roseman and Sirianni talked about. What were your major issues? But that's it. That's what I want to get to. What were your major issues with this offense this season?
I thought it lacked balance. I thought it lacked rhythm, but I also thought that they were too reliant on or too enamored with going after the explosive play when there were plays to be made in front of them that they opted not to do. The quarterback didn't see it. Whatever the case was, they didn't use the middle of the field enough. I thought Dallas Goedert. There were many instances this year, Adam, where I thought that he had a chance to really take advantage of a weak second level and intermediary levels, and he just wasn't able to. They never got the ball to him. I also didn't like that they only had two wide receivers they can count on. They didn't really have much of a third option, not a consistent one. It was a rotation of players, and teams didn't really respect that area of the field that Hurts was going to, exploit it, or that the Eagles were going to continue to try and, make it known they're going to attack that way. So I just didn't think it didn't have much of a function.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, when you look at these coordinator candidates, Cliff Kingsbury, who we're told did well enough that there's definitely a possibility of a second interview. They were pretty impressed with him. Now Kingsbury will, if he became their offense coordinator, would bring in some of his people. So that's interesting. If that's as we understand it, and you would want any coordinator bring in guys that he wants to work with to run his scheme. And by the way, he runs a completely different scheme than anything the Eagles do. Spread concepts. In the first 2 years, heavy 10 personnel, which is 4 receivers and 1 back, no tight ends. With Cardinals, then he started to become more conventional and started to introduce the tight end.
Yep.
But again, Andrew, tight ends are not big in Cliff Kingsbury's scheme. Now, Kellen Moore, who they interviewed 2 years ago when they interviewed Nick, he was one of their head coaching candidates. Kellen Moore is a guy that is heavy spread. He were a ton of 3 receiver sets, not 4 like Kingsbury, but heavy in 3 receiver sets. He's a very aggressive passer, a pass game guy. They had the #1 offense a couple years with Dallas. Now, what happened with him in Dallas is that Mike McCarthy wanted to call the plays. He was told by Jerry Jones when he got the job, "You're not calling it. Kellen's our guy," and it worked well. But Mike he finally got his way and he let Kellen go, and Kellen became the Chargers OC this past season. Here's what happened there. Mike Williams tore his ACL. Keenan Allen, who was having a great season, had this he had another lingering injury, I think like a hip injury the year before. He had a hamstring problem. So he didn't wind up playing the final quarter of the season. And then Josh Palmer had 2 separate knee injuries, who, by the way, is a pretty good third receiver.
Mhm.
And a source who worked with Kellen Moore told me that the number 3 receiver will be involved anywhere he goes. And that's one of the many problems I had with the Eagles offense last season, Andrew, was you mentioned Zacchaeus, and I get Quez Watkins not a very good player, but he could run. And Julio Jones, the third receiver, like, why would you bring an OZ in if you're not going to use him? That was ridiculous. Like, your third receiver doesn't have to catch 50 balls, but could you use him? That was
Well,
ridiculous.
especially on those, if they were so adamant and hell bent on throwing those screen passes, that's Olamide Zacchaeus and Britton Covey's. That's right in their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Get him in space.
And by the way, how bad of a screen team were they last season?
Horrendous.
Terrible. One of the worst in my lifetime. I was embarrassed by it. You mentioned sort of the balance to everything. Okay, DeAndre Swift, one of the most dynamic running backs in the league. He had a Pro Bowl season. The lack of usage of the pass game. You and I and Moshe were training camp a lot. We were blown away by how much he got the ball in the pass game. After like the first 5-6 weeks, it's like they never heard of checking it down him or calling a pass play to him when he was on the field. That was ridiculous. That's on Nick. Like, what the hell? I was like, this is embarrassing. Why didn't you even make the trade if you're not going to get down the football? That was bad.
And that's interesting because Olamide Zacchaeus and Quez Watkins are free agents. Probably
Right.
neither are going to return, which leaves just AJ, Devontae, Britton Covey for your top 3 receivers. Obviously, the Eagles need to draft one or maybe sign a free agent, maybe a Juwan Jennings or something, or somebody to that effect from the 49ers. But they clearly need to get better in that area for teams to respect that area of the field, that they're going to threaten that.
Right. So if they brought in Moore or Kingsbury, you absolutely, Andrew, have to have, because those guys they're gonna spread you out and they're gonna use those. And Kellen Moore's a pretty good play caller. Now, what happened with Austin Eckler is one of the reasons why they didn't extend his contract was they were concerned about, because he's not a guy they could have heavy volume with. Though he's good for a spread, they felt they needed to be a 2-back system with him, and they tried other backs, it just didn't work. But yeah, he's available. I know other teams are interested in him, and now one thing we would explain is going forward here, as we understand it, Stallin's still the run game coordinator. That will never change, but they're looking there, and Nick talked about a little bit about this because they're going to bring a new scheme, but he didn't go into the detail that we understand. They want to stress the defense, Andrew. They want to get, and yes, they want to have a vertical thing, but they want to take short to intermediate to long. You're absolutely right when you said they were too vertical heavy. Like, there was no intermediate pass game. As we understand it, that's what they want from whoever they hire. They want all 3 levels stretched. They weren't doing that. Because this is my problem with Nick, as we talked about earlier in this show. Once they figured him out and Brian Johnson out, they had no second act. And that's on Nick. Like, that's not a Brian Johnson problem. Like, again, Johnson was running a scheme. Now, did Brian Johnson want to do stuff and Nick didn't want to do it? We don't know. We just know what the results were. They were pathetic, quite frankly. It was just, it faded. I don't care what the rankings were. We had 2 eyes. We saw it fade. They want, as we understand, they want more modern concepts, more versatility to the scheme, more passes inside the numbers, backs getting involved. And the other thing is, and they also have interest in some of these West Coast guys, Gerard Johnson, who we put out on Monday. That's a guy they have interest in, and they wound up interviewing him. He worked with Bobby Slowick, who, I mean, Andrew, let's talk about it. Bobby Slowick, we had a couple out of nowhere, the guy's never been a positional coach. This was an incredible job that he did in Gerard's, his quarterback coach. Eagles know him because how he does, because he signed him as an OT quarterback. Yeah, I was there. I remember, like, oh, wow, Gerard Johnson, formerly of Texas A&M. So they're looking at that West Coast tree. They're not now. Zach Robinson, I think, because the word around the league was Zach Robinson would go with Raheem Morris.
Yeah,
that probably would happen. But they're looking at the West Coast tree. So, and also if they decide to wait, we're told Clint Kubiak, who's the pass game special for the Niners, has got to keep an eye on, because again, if they wait, that would be a guy. But they gotta get this right, Andrew. This past game was quite anemic in the second half. And let me ask you this question: was, in your estimation, watching this team, this is another thing we didn't talk enough about in the regular season. Do you think the offensive line was good enough?
Actually, I don't. I thought that there were many instances, Adam, where I went into the weeks thinking that that line should be able to dominate teams like the Jets, teams like the Commanders, the Seahawks, teams with lackluster fronts. That I thought that the Eagles' offensive line should be able to dominate and be able to move them, and they just didn't have that kind of success. And I just, you wonder if they were showing signs of age. Kelsey was good this year, but not the great Kelsey that we've grown accustomed to seeing. I thought that Mailata was all right, but you didn't get dominant performances across the board. I thought Landon Dickerson had a really good season, but oddly enough, I just didn't think the offensive line, which is one of the foundational pieces of this team and of this team's philosophy, I didn't think they were quite up to the level that they usually play.
So let me also ask you this question: if Kelsey retires like we all think he's going to do, would you rather keep Jurgens at right guard, where he flashed? I know at the end of the season wasn't great, but he definitely did some good things. I get it. Jurgens was drafted to keep to take over for Kelsey. We all know that. But teams always have options. You have Tyler Steen, and obviously Steen would take over for Jurgens. Jurgens goes inside. Are you hell-bent on saying he's got to be the center? Is that kind of what you're thinking is? He should be?
Well, they drafted him to be the center, Adam, and I don't know that he was overly late in the season. I thought that Cam Jurgens' play sort of tailed off a little bit at right guard. I would put him at center, and this is a big crucial offseason for Tyler Steen to see if he's able to, you get a full year playing right guard, which is a position that was foreign to him. See how he comes back for OTAs and training camp at right guard, because I think you might have something there. That's the combination that I would go with. Obviously, Landon Dickerson at left guard, Mailata at left tackle, and Lane at right tackle. I think that if Kelsey doesn't return, I think that would be the optimal lineup.
And when you look at this situation also, going forward here, do they start thinking about drafting Lane Johnson's replacement?
I think you have to, because Lane mentioned, I guess it was a couple years ago now, that he was going to play a handful more seasons. And right. I think when you're talking about somebody as crucial as Lane Johnson is to the franchise, I not only think you have to start looking at addressing it, but I think you have to consider doing it fairly high, because you see how crucial he was to their success. So it's something to start thinking about. As these seasons go by, you keep forgetting it. It's like these guys are getting older and they've been around a while, and that's why it was so crucial to take advantage of that window when they were in the Super Bowl, because you just don't know how it's going to shake out down the road.
Yeah, and honestly, if you look at who's under contract, Brett Johnson, I know they like as a backup tackle. Carlos Steen, who you mentioned, Driscoll's contract's up. Tuipueta's contract's up. They don't have a lot of guys with offensive line, under contract. So they've got, Howie's got a little bit more work than I anticipated. Andrew, going forward here.
Oh yeah, and I want to circle back to a name that you mentioned in Kellen Moore, because going back to that press conference, Adam, one thing that I took away later towards the end of the press conference was the primary focus, and this sort of goes without saying, is to elevate the quarterback's play and bring Jalen Hurts back to prominence.
Yep.
That comes first and foremost. He's your $250 million guy. The offense revolves around him. So I think when you keeping that in mind, Kellen Moore is pretty interesting in that regard. Former quarterbacks coach. I think that I've gotten good feedback that he's really good in that area at developing quarterbacks and finding ways to best accentuate what they do. That's somebody that I think out of all the names that we've mentioned that from offensive coordinator, he's the most intriguing thus far.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a good list, and I'm sure they'll add more before they decide what they're going to do there. All right, before we get to our final segment, let's hear from our friends at the Game Time mobile app.
Well, losing really stinks. Having to fire all of your coaches really stinks if you're an NFL team, but it also stinks trying to find good tickets online. But not if you have the Game Time app. It's the fast, easy way to buy tickets for sporting events, concerts, and theater shows near you. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And right now, on the Game Time app. You're just 2 taps away from tickets to any of the local sports teams, pro, college, comedy shows, concerts, and more. The best part is Game Time offers event cancellation protection and even job loss protection. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. They've got the all-in prices that show you the total upfront, and you get to see the view from your seat right there on the app. I think that's one of the most important features that they've got. You know exactly what you're getting when you get to check out. Also, Game Time's obsessed with helping you save money. They've got the zone deals that let you pick the section while Game Time picks the seats, so you get the best savings. And then there's the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less money, then Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code BIRDS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the redeem code BIRDS, BIRDS, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, it's Adam Caplan and Andrew DiCecco here for Inside the Birds. And Andrew, all right, so you were in the locker room all the time. You got to know these young players. How did you decide to start the rookie diaries? I know the Eagles were very happy, and I know that we know for a fact that people love that you were doing that. A lot of people saw it. So give us an idea how you came up with this idea and how it all started.
Well, I try to think outside the box, and in doing so, I mean, Nolan Smith's been written about, Jalen Carter's been written about. I wanted to do something rookie centric, but a player that I identified as someone that I thought had a chance to factor into the defense, so there would be something to write about and chronicle throughout the season. And to me, Eli Ricks was that guy. And I got a chance to get to know him. Every week we would talk, and I got to know some of his outside interests. Talk about you're going through, you're seeing him go through the growing pains of learning a new position, the challenges there at nickel, the defensive coordinator change, some games where he didn't play so well, where he was going against CeeDee Lamb, and he was very accountable in that, and sort of going through the ebbs and flows of the season with him. And I mean, it was a lot of fun for one, but you also learn a lot about a player. And someone who, for young players playing the cornerback position, for those who don't know, you have to have a really short memory. And those who don't, it can really mess with you. It can really stunt your development. But for him, playing at such a high level, LSU, Alabama, he played at IMG Academy. So some of the highest football to be played, he played there. So there wasn't anything that he was going to see that he was going to be able to back down from or be intimidated by. So I thought that a lot of young players might pack it in. You know, you have CeeDee Lamb go nuts, go run roughshod all over you, and things like that. He didn't, and you got to. I mean, I think you have to tip your cap to him for that. But it also lends itself to, you know, you see why the coaches were so apt to put him out there, because I think he had a much more mature mindset than most rookies do coming in.
Wow. How did he feel like at the end of the season? Did he talk about kind of stamina wise and how he held up? Because this is a lot of game for a young kid.
Yeah, he said he's sore and he's a little beat up. I asked him what his focus will be for the offseason. I said, you're going to get a little stronger. You're going to look to add some weight. He's like, yeah, I definitely need to add some muscle mass. You know, that was one thing this season that he had mentioned to me. Thing he was most proud of was his sort of emergence on special teams. It's an area he never really played before, but it really helped him from a tackling standpoint. You remember earlier in the season, he was playing primarily on third downs, where Bradley Roby was playing early downs, because they liked Roby's ability to as a run defender, and they liked Rick's coverage ability. But Ricks took that as a challenge to get better from a tackling standpoint. And I think by and large he did. Getting stronger and adding muscle mass and having a year under your belt will certainly help in that area. So, I mean, it's something to keep an eye on.
Nice. So what? So he's going to try to put some muscle mass on. Is he going back home? Like, did he say where he's going to?
No, he said he's actually going to stay here because he has two puppies, and so he'll be training here and taking a few trips. You know, he's really into the jujitsu. And I said, is this going to be the off season where you implement that into your training? He said, yeah, I'm going to be doing something like that. So he said he'll keep me posted. But he's trying to get his brothers involved with it too. So I'm interested to see how he comes back after, you know, a season where he was sort of thrown into the fire.
So you spent the whole season there. Give us an overview of being a beat guy, going in there, getting to know the players, covering the team. the life of a beat reporter, and we go to InsideTheBirds.com to read a lot of Andrew's stuff. But what was it like being there this whole season?
It was interesting because you see a team that's riding high off 10-1, but there was never a sense of we've made it. We have something special here. We're destined for the Super Bowl. There was always we got a lot to clean up, right? We're not where we need to be, but I personally got a sense of togetherness in the locker room. And then as the season went on, I mean, I'll tell you what, Adam, there was nothing more awkward than walking into that locker room on Christmas when they had won the game, but you would have thought that they lost the game. It was very tense, I would say, was the mood there, the temperature. And that's where you started to see, okay, like, are we for real? We have legitimate problems here. How are we going to be able to fix it? We don't have a lot of time. We keep saying the same thing and the message is falling on deaf ears. We don't have an answer for it. So that's where you started to see sort of like a very business-like approach in how they went about their business, and didn't necessarily see the same camaraderie, I guess is fair to say, as I did earlier in the season. But everybody was very affable, happy to answer questions. But if you're looking at it from a temperature standpoint, that's where I noticed a little bit of a difference.
Let me ask you this also. We don't talk much about Sirianni in terms of, we know he's big on connecting. You talked about when they were 10-1. And you also mentioned, and I know a lot of other reporters were talking about this, that the team seemed to be dissatisfied from even winning sometimes, that they weren't playing up to their potential. What was it? Was it just the veteran players were saying this? Was it the younger players? What sense did you get from being around the players? Was it the whole team were saying this, or just the veterans?
That was a sentiment that was echoed pretty much universally throughout the locker room. They know what they were capable of. This is a team, by and large, that had most of the same guys. They've reached the pinnacle. They were on the big stage playing the Super Bowl, and they knew what championship caliber football looks like, and that certainly wasn't it. So you didn't even get the sense for the younger players, like, yeah, we're winning, we're 10-1, that's great. No, I mean, I think that there was, with the veteran leadership that was there, the standard was very well set in stone, and they knew what the level of Eagles football was, and that certainly wasn't it.
But man, in the end, I mean, people want to question kind of some of the things that went on there. They also have to take a look at the leadership and why this thing folded, Andrew. So one thing I would ask you, because it's always hard to know this kind of stuff. Like in 2011, anyone who covered the team knew that this roster was not constructed well, and you had a lot of guys who were selfish. But you've never heard of, people want to question Hurts and some stuff. I know there's some stuff that's out there already, but I don't want to say there were bad guys in 2011, but there was some selfishness. Being around the team like you were, did you feel there were selfish guys? What was there a leadership issue? What was the problem?
No, I thought the leadership was strong. I thought Fletcher Cox really affirmed himself as a leader this year, more so, just really establishing it. Kelsey's a locker room pillar. I have an interesting theory though, Adam, as to the defensive breakdown. Sometimes and you see this across the league, the Eagles aren't exclusive in this, but when you add a lot of these veteran mercenaries on the free agent market, and they haven't necessarily been with the team through OTAs and training camp, you're sort of dropping them in sporadically throughout the season in some cases. It's really hard to sort of immerse yourself in the culture and get a feel for the defensive flow, build camaraderie with your teammates, and get the communication where it needs to be. You're sort of just thrown in there, and they're not always going to be fully committed because you know that you're sort of a stopgap player and you're here for the short term trying to get a ring. So I think that when you look at some of the breakdowns there, why you didn't see the meshing of the back end and the pass rush and the line at the second level, I think that has something to do with it. But I thought the leadership was pretty good all across the board. I just didn't think that. I mean, you could look at the coordinator change. That to me was a turning point. There were many things across the board. Jalen Hurts didn't play at his normal MVP caliber level. So I think that also, sort of short-circuited the offense to a degree. But I mean, you could look at there was an amalgam of things that went wrong.
Because I could never quite put my finger on why this team faded. Again, they were 10-1, but you knew they weren't as good as their record because they were just skating by. But to end the season like they did, losing 6 out of 7, and just the way that they lost was just bizarre to me. And it's something that In my lifetime, I mean, living in the Philadelphia area as you have, we've seen some chokes before, but this has been an odd one. Now they still made the playoffs, but it was just ugly. And when they were not competitive against Tampa Bay, Andrew, to me, I just couldn't understand. Like, how could you not show up in the most important game and your season ends if you lose? To not be competitive, to me, was disgusting, to be honest with you, for any team.
Yeah, I got the sense. I don't know if you did, Adam, but they almost saw the writing on the wall. They knew they weren't playing good football. Let's face it, that's what it was. It was
Sure.
just bad football. And you're not going into the postseason with any sort of momentum. And it's almost like, I don't want to say your heads are down or you're just expecting, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it sure seemed that way. A lot of the same issues that had been persisting throughout that stretch, the surface once again, the tackling woes, the communication errors, the lackadaisical plays on offense, the lapses. I mean, that's not Eagles football, and that's not, given the talent that you have there, it really is inexcusable.
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. All right, Andrew, great job, my friend. Hope to have you on soon. For Andrew DiCecco, I'm Adam Caplan, and we'll speak to you on Monday. Thank you.
Be sure to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com and on Twitter at phlsportsnation.